Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki, Shri Radha Govinda Deva ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. We're reading today from the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 14, entitled Pregnancy of Deity in the Evening. And we're looking at text number 19. Yam Mahuratmano Yardam Shreyas Kamasya Manini Yasyam Swadhura Madhyasya Pumams Charati Vijvara Yam Mahuratmano Yardham Shreyas Kamasya Manini Yasyam Swadhura Madhyasya Pumams Charati Vijvara Yam Mahuratmayo Yardam Shreyas Kamasya Manini Yasyam Swadhura Madhyasya Pumams Charati Vijvara. Please repeat. Shreyas Kamasya Manini Yasyam Swadhura Madhyasya Pumams Charati Vijvara Yam Mahuratmano Yardam Shreyas Kamasya Manini Yasyam Swadhura Madhyasya Pumams Charati Vijvara Yam Mahuratmano Yardam Shreyas Kamasya Manini Yasyam Swadhura Madhyasya Pumams Charati Vijvara. Ladies. Yam Mahuratmano Yardam Shreyas Kamasya Manini Yasyam Swadhura Madhyasya Pumams Charati Vijvara. Yam Mahuratmano Yardam Shreyas Kamasya Manini Yasyam Swadhura Madhyasya Pumams Charati Vijvara. Yam, the wife who, Ahu, is said, Atmana, of the body, he, thus, Ardham, half, Shreya, welfare, Kamasya, of all desires, Manini, a respectful one, Yasyam, in whom, Swadhuram, all responsibilities, Adhyasya, entrusting, Puman, a man, Charati, moves. Vijvara, without anxiety. Translation and purport. O respectful one, a wife is so helpful that she is called the better half of a man's body because of her sharing in all auspicious activities. A man can move without anxiety, entrusting all responsibilities to his wife. Purport. By the Vedic injunction, the wife is accepted as the better half of a man's body because she is supposed to be responsible for discharging half of the duties of the husband. A family man has a responsibility to perform 5 kinds of sacrifices called Pancha Yagya in order to get relief from all kinds of unavoidable sinful reaction incurred in the course of his affairs. When a man becomes qualitatively like the cats and dogs, he forgets his duties in cultivating spiritual values, and thus he accepts his wife as a sense-gratificatory agency. When the wife is accepted as a sense-gratificatory agency, personal beauty is the main consideration, and as soon as there is a break in personal sense gratification, there is disruption or divorce. But when husband and wife aim at spiritual advancement by mutual cooperation, there is no consideration of personal beauty or the disruption of so-called love. In the material world, there is no question of love. Marriage is actually a duty performed in mutual cooperation as directed in the authoritative scriptures for spiritual advancement. Therefore, marriage is essential in order to avoid the life of cats and dogs who are not meant for spiritual enlightenment. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumaditam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swabadamtyam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Vigam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavanishvare Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. A respectful one, a wife is so helpful that she is called the better half of a man's body because of her sharing in all auspicious activities. A man can move without anxiety, entrusting all responsibilities to his wife. So here we are seeing Kashyapa Muni's attempt to remind his wife about the higher principles of married life. Although it is very natural in the material world for man and woman to come together, there is a natural attraction that is all over, not just in human life, but that predominates in the whole of the material energy. But marriage, as conceived of by the Vedic sages or in Vedic culture, and for that matter, also to a large part in most cultures in the world, is something a little different. It is not just that a man and woman come together and then, they are married, which is so often the case now in the modern world. People think, I want to get married, and then they think that it's as simple as 2 people coming together. Before, it always had to happen at least in front of a priest. So many people now, even though they're not really themselves very religious, they'll still maybe get married in front of a priest because their grandmother will be there and they don't want to cause any kind of disturbance. But we see all kinds of people. I had a friend who, it's a friend from before Krishna consciousness, and he got ordained so that he can, because he had to preside over the marriage of a friend, and then they made an altar, and on the altar they put a whole bowl full of joints. And then everybody was high at the wedding, and then he was the priest at the wedding, and he married them in full regalia. So we see in the modern world a little bit of a misconception about what marriage is supposed to be. And marriage as conceived of in Vedic culture is actually something that's very serious. It's not something really to be joked about. Because, as Prabhupada said here, the distinction between the purpose for marriage, as Prabhupada says here, is to avoid the life of cats and dogs. So marriage is conceived of in the Vedic culture. It's meant to elevate one. And it's not meant to just be an extension of animal life. Because the Vedic understanding is that human life is something very serious. There's an ultimate goal to it. And then marriage is supposed to form part of that ultimate goal. So one can only really get married in the original term if it is related to that ultimate goal, related to Krishna, related to God. And therefore we see in the Christian church, even that most of us are familiar with, you see about the vows that one takes. It's done before a priest, it's done in the church. It's one of those things that was always connected to a religious institution, to the idea that one gets married before God, and that promise is made before God. So in this way, marriage is always understood to be a sacred thing. So here Kashyapa Muni, he's trying to remind his wife, remind her that what is the ultimate goal of this marriage, and what is the duties really that come together, that both people have to bring in to make it what it is supposed to be. So we see here that Prabhupada says here by Vedic injunction, the wife is accepted as the better half of a man's body. So if we look at Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's purport to this verse, he quotes from the Shruti even. It's a famous verse that says the wife is the other half of the man's body. So the idea then is that two people ultimately become one, just like two halves of one body. And there's immense benefit in that. We see that here, yasyam swadhuram atyasya, that the wife, the man, he entrusts swaduram, his own responsibilities onto the wife. Prabhupada quotes here that from the, sort of the archetypical Vedic understanding is that the wife is then also responsible for many of those household rites that have to be performed. So the Pancha Yagya was in all household life, it is understood that to survive within this world, there will have to be some violence, ultimately. Even if you live according to high religious principles, there will be some violence, there will be some death. When you light a fire, some entities will die. When you have your water pot and you put it, some entities will die. When you sweep, some entities will die. So the idea is that there's no way to live in this world without causing some bad karma, or some entanglement. So therefore there were all these household rites that have to be performed to purify every household of these elements. And the wife, she was responsible also, related very much in many of these sacrifices. We see also in many Vedic rituals that the individual, that these sacrifices, there is a priest, and then there is the person on whose behalf these rituals are performed. And the wife is very active in those ceremonies. It's like there's a specific role for the wife also. So the husband and wife then, they're supposed to collectively perform these sacrifices, and in this way assist one another. Then there's also just the practical realities of when you have your own house and your own household. There's the separation of duties that have to be performed. The traditional thing, the husband going out and making money, and the wife taking care of the household. And we see that, we see even on a high level, if you look at kings and queens, then you would see the king goes out and conquers the king, and the queen, she has to run the palace. So sometimes it's like therefore one marries a wife who has equal capacity in one sense, because if you're a king, it's also you have to marry. The queen has equal high responsibility, but in connection with her husband's responsibilities. So in this way, then, if one is fortunate enough to get this Vedic kind of marriage, it's understood to be extremely helpful in one's spiritual life. But here Kashyapa is reminding his wife about this ultimate duty because, as we know, there is the ideals and the archetypes that one is aiming for in spiritual life, but it takes work to put it into practice. Just like all of us, we read the Bhagavatam, there will be these immense descriptions of the devotee, what it means to be a devotee. And sometimes you read Prabhupada's purports, and Prabhupada says, a devotee is not interested in his own sense gratification, but only in the pleasure of the Lord. And then you wonder, oh, but am I a devotee? Like when you read these descriptions of the devotee, it's actually quite high. You know, when Prabhupada writes about the devotee this and the devotee that. So for us in the material world, we are sadhakas, we are practitioners. So we are trying to move towards that ideal. So similar in life, we see that when we get married, in any relationship, that one is trying. And there is always danger in this world. There's challenges. It's not that that happens automatically. One has to work for it. It actually takes quite a lot of effort. Any one of these, any identity within the Vedic society will take a lot of effort. Whether you want to be a householder takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of work. And if you are a brahmachari, it also takes a lot of work to make that ashram genuine. It's not about just being single or being in a relationship. That is a very superficial understanding of what these relationships mean. Both of these identities in spiritual life, they actually require a lot of work to make it meaningful. And that is the whole purpose of Vedic civilization, that it gives us an identity and a position that is connected with responsibilities. Because as Prabhupada says, these responsibilities, they help us avoid the life of cats and dogs. They elevate us. These responsibilities, even though it can sometimes feel very heavy, something that we have to carry, it forces us up to a higher level. So we see that the depth within which the relationships work in Vedic society is much deeper. So because it is much more serious, it's connected to serious responsibilities, but the payoff then ultimately, one can say, is that it is much deeper. So as Prabhupada says here, marriage is a duty performed in mutual cooperation as directed in the authoritative scriptures for spiritual advancement. This might not sound very romantic in one sense. It sounds like Prabhupada says here, in the material world, there is no question of love. But we see that the reality is that it is only in reference to Krishna that any of these relationships can become meaningful. Because if we think about what is the principle of love, the idea is that, well, to have the other person's welfare as your priority, isn't it? Like how can you say you love someone if you don't want them to be happy? But if you are not going to invest in Krishna consciousness, how can you really say that you are trying your best to make that other individual happy? So we see that, therefore, if it does not have there's no reference to Krishna, then there can be no love, because there can be no ultimate benefit, no ultimate welfare. And we see the same thing in all relationships, whether it's friendship, if you meet someone, or your family. If there's no interest or desire to support the other person spiritually, then it is still on a superficial platform. It cannot have real depth. So, but it is a challenge. It's a big challenge, because we see that in the end of the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asks Krishna, what is it that makes us do things that we don't want to do? What is it that forces us to perform sinful activities even though we don't want to? Krishna says it is simple. It is karma that is born from rajagun. It's from the mode of passion that impels one to lust. We translate it as lust. What is lust? Karma means, strong personal desire without any consideration of the consequences. Prabhupada also once, he defines lust as desire that cannot be fulfilled. When you have some desire for something material, but it cannot actually be satisfied, cannot be fulfilled. Then you are afflicted by lust. It means you're desiring something that you will never actually be able to get. You will never get satisfaction if you pursue that course of activity. This is very serious to understand. That is wherefore desire is considered to be like a fire. If you just add fuel to the fire, it's just going to continue burning stronger. So in any relationship that we enter into, whether it's entering into the household ashram or entering into the brahmachari ashram, any kind of Vedic situation, what we bring with us is our desires. And these desires will be challenged and they will be purified. And that is the whole purpose of these ashrams, is that it forces us to confront what is it that we really want. And personal desire is then something that has to be very carefully managed. So one will see that the ideal, as it is composed here, is that the husband is then supposed to be Krishna's representative in one sense. His ultimate duty is towards Krishna. His ultimate duty is towards seeing how he will protect his dependents, his wife and his children, by providing for them what is his natural duty also, but at the same time, how is he going to bring that spiritual energy into a household? You see? The big reason why people get married, one of the main reasons, the main challenges in the brahmachari ashram, in the beginning we think it is just the senses. I want to break one of the regulative principles, I want to do this or that. But actually that is not really the issue. But if that's your issue, and if you think if you get married then you're going to solve the problem, then good luck with that. Because that's very difficult. And really what we see at a certain point with brahmacharis, after a while, even if you become calm, you become well situated, you get situated in the mode of goodness, the thing is that gets you, after a while, is the desire for some independence, for your own space, for your own life. I remember once, that is the challenge with brahmachari life, is that I once met a brahmachari in Chalpati, and he told us that, he says, if you really want to be a brahmachari for the rest of your life, he says, then you have to be happy to be no one. You just have to be happy to be whatever it is required of you to be. So it is really that sense of independence and a sense of having your own identity and having your own sort of space and your own thing that you want to do. And it's not, that is accounted for. Therefore the household ashram is there. Well, go out, get your own space, get your own thing going, but take responsibility for it. And that responsibility is quite heavy. So we see that in household life, then the challenge is when one transitions into household life, is then you sit with that weight of material responsibility that's bearing on your head. So for large part it means financial and all the issues that come with. And in the middle of this, to still be able to be dedicated for Krishna, to say, okay, I will still in the middle of all these material responsibilities have the strength to sit down and hear and chant and encourage that with my family. That requires some strength. That requires one to be able to put the mode of passion aside and say, now I'm going to stop just worrying about money or thinking about my material situation. Now we're going to sit and we're going to hear and chant. That is really a certain kind of strength that is required. And that is the strength that one cultivates in the brahmachari ashram. In the brahmachari ashram, one has the privilege of putting material pressure aside and then having the privilege of prioritizing the absolute. That is the amazing thing of the brahmachari ashram. You can sit and you can be like, now I'm going to invest in the ultimate and what is ultimately important, which is hearing and chanting and spreading Krishna consciousness. And the amazing thing with the brahmachari ashram is that you have a life that is not dictated by the terms of the modern economy in one sense. Like you're going out, and even if you go out for 8 hours and you only distribute one book, it's still a success. It's still a success. If that's your business model, you're going to fail. If you enter into the world of business, then that model is not going to work so well. But the brahmachari ashram, your whole priorities are different. The priority is what is absolutely important. There's one letter that Prabhupada says, he says, let them go out and distribute books. Even if they go out and they don't distribute a single book, that is not a problem. That's not a problem. They will get the same benefit. So that's the brahmachari ashram, that one practices, in one sense, prioritizing what is ultimately important. And that is preparation for either staying a brahmachari or for entering into household life. Where there, you will have to be the individual that will now have to prioritize the absolute in the middle of so many pressing concerns that look so important. You see, in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, we see when Krishna, he went to visit the city Mithila. And there were two devotees there in Mithila. There was the king of Mithila, who was King Bahulashva, who was a pure devotee. And then there was a Brahmana who also lived there in Mithila, who was known as Shrutadev. So they were interesting because on the one hand, there was King Bahulashva, who was highly opulent, a very rich person and powerful, but he was a pure devotee. And on the other hand, there was Shrutadev. And Shrutadev, it said, Shrutadev, every day, he only collected just what he needed to feed him and his family. So he had family also, he had a wife and children. But he only got just what he needed, every single day, nothing more. Now for us, that is almost inconceivable. And also practically, in the modern world, it's difficult to live like that. If you have just enough money to buy your groceries for today. And then next day you'll see what happens. It's a little hectic, because the modern world is not like that. Prabhupada also said that's why India is very well suited for simple living, just because of the climate and the reality of how simple it is to live there. But the principle is interesting, that he just really lived very simple, and he minimized his material needs as far as possible. And then he says that when Krishna ultimately came there and came to his house and he was able to receive Krishna, he received him with very simple. He cooked some sabjis with like local fruits and stuff he got, and he gave Krishna some water and a straw sitting mat to sit at. And then he offered his prayers to Krishna. And he said, it is, in one sense, even now, it is the first time I've seen you. Actually, it is not the first time, because you have always been there with me. As the super soul, says Krishna, you have always been in my heart for many, many births. He says, but those people who are devoted to constantly hearing and chanting, they are able to perceive you. But it says, those individuals who are karma vichita chaita, means those individuals whose minds are disturbed by their material activities, they are not able to perceive you. You cannot see Krishna in the heart if you are too disturbed by your material activities. So we see that in household life, the challenge then is to be able to engage with the material energy, but without getting bewildered, without becoming obsessed ultimately with money, your status, whatever, all the various things that you need to think about. Because these obsessions, they absorb the whole mind. And then Krishna, or the idea to chant or to hear, it seems so impractical. It just seems like, I don't have time for this, I'm sorry. And sometimes you meet people like that, fried out devotees, who are so stressed and obsessed with all kinds of things, and then you ask them, and they complain. They say, oh, I'm so disturbed by this and this thing, and I have so many issues. And then you ask them, but are you chanting or are you reading a bit? And then they're like, no, gosh, I can't even think about doing this. So you see, karma, vichitta, chaita, the mind is just so disturbed. They cannot understand that in all conditions of life, we should continue performing these absolute duties. So, therefore, it's difficult. It's difficult ultimately. Then we need some strength to enter into these ashrams, to be able to properly both bring that. So the husband ideally has to bring that ability to prioritize the absolute. And for a wife then also, very austere, marriage requires a big sacrifice. Because as you see here, to become another person's half of their body means that both people have to sacrifice, to a certain extent, a lot of their own independence. To become one person, it means that now your whole life is lived in reference to another person's needs and desires. There's a lot of benefit in it, but it's also difficult. That's why a lot of people, in the modern world at least, they're not sure if they want to get married. Maybe they should just stay single. Because then you have your own space, your own life. And even nowadays, there's some modern versions of marriage where people get married, and they don't actually, they sort of continue living their own lives, but sort of just in close proximity to one another. So to become one person is definitely, one has to really be ready for that. And therefore we see the marriage vows are like that. And as Prabhupada says here also, it is when that commitment becomes very deep that then it becomes very strong. But if it is ultimately just based on one's personal sense gratification, then the commitment is not so good. Because what will happen? We see that the archetypical example of a chaste woman is if she can stay with her husband when he loses all his money. It's very difficult. One thing, you get married and you get all this benefit, and then somehow your husband loses his business, he goes bankrupt. And then will you stay? But that's marriage. That's the idea, is that one stays together in sickness and health, or in disease, or in poverty. But that one can only approach it from that perspective if one has this higher goal in mind, that one understands that the ultimate goal of these relationships are for spiritual, as Prabhupada says here, for mutual cooperation and performing duties as directed in authoritative scriptures. And the interesting thing with these relationships is that if it is based on this spiritual conception, whether in the household ashram or even in the brahmachari ashram, where you are surrounded by brahmacharis and your connection with one another is in relation to Krishna, what happens is that the modern world will say that, oh, this sounds very unromantic, that I have to get married, but the highest duty is towards God. Or you say you have to live with a bunch of people in the same room, but you don't live with them because you don't choose them because of your friends and who you like. You choose them because you're with them because these are the other guys that are also serious about Krishna consciousness. And these relationships, ironically enough, they become much deeper than any other kind of relationship. The friends we make in the ashram, these relationships are much deeper. There's actually much more affection and all these other things that people are looking for. People are looking for affection and consideration and care, what they call love. But this can only take birth if Krishna is there. Because then there is that spirit of mutual sacrifice. And the mutual sacrifice is what binds people to one another. What binds people to one another. When you see other people sacrificing for Krishna's pleasure, then that obliges us to them. And that feeling of obligation is really the strongest connection between two living entities. And therefore, we also have to remember that at the base, my spiritual master oftentimes says that marriage, or even our relationship with devotees, that they have to be based on a strong sense of friendship. Because we are all ultimately struggling together. That's the real goal. When you move into a temple, you're living into a brahmachari ashram because you want to struggle together. Because it's easier if you struggle together. It's difficult. To be Krishna conscious is difficult. But at least if you struggle with other people, there's some strength that comes from it. And marriage is the same. It's difficult to be Krishna conscious. But then you get married to someone, you say, well, let us struggle together. The husband and wife, let's come together and let's try together to fight. To fight for Krishna's pleasure, to try to put our selfishness aside, to dedicate ourselves to a higher goal. That's really the goal. So therefore, sometimes you meet people and they have unrealistic expectations. They think, oh yeah, marriage will solve all my problems. No, the struggle always continues. Because the real issue that we have, the real thing that is hampering our happiness in life is our deep-seated sense of selfishness. That is the thing that covers us, and it makes it very difficult for us to be satisfied in any condition of life, selfishness. And all the Vedic ashrams, they are all basically just various steps and different strategies that one takes to try to overcome this inherent selfishness that we have. And that communal sense of struggle, the basis of that is friendship, because sometimes it is difficult. Sometimes in the ashram, you will see someone's motivation will go down. Then you see someone who's going through a difficult time. Now then we have to stay friends to understand that, listen, we are here to struggle together. It's not that now, okay, this person is not exhibiting the highest Krishna conscious behavior. So now, okay, that's it. Okay, let's boot them. This is done now. They're finished. No, then we have to stay friends. We have to stay friends with the devotees. So similarly in household life also, when either husband or wife is going through a challenging period in life, then there has to be a sense of friendship. That, oh, my husband is now struggling. He's struggling, he's under a lot of stress, his rounds are not good, his spiritual life is not good. What can I do to support him? Similarly, if the wife is undergoing challenges, she's encountering difficulties also in her spiritual life, the attitude is then, well, we are friends in Krishna consciousness. How can we help one another? So that's also the important thing when it comes to these descriptions that we have. Because the ideals are very high. The ideal Vedic wife, the ideal Vedic husband, the ideal brahmachari, the ideal temple manager, the ideal brahmachari leader. These ideals can sometimes make us very hard-hearted towards one another. And then we want to beat one another with these ideals. But it's not like that. It is that we are all working together. We're all coming together and struggling together and trying our best to please Krishna, and by, in one sense, trying to embody these ideals as best as we can. But the spirit of friendship and mutual support is very important in Krishna conscious relationships, because otherwise it all stays, it can easily be disrupted, as Prabhupada says here. So when we understand that we are together in either ashram for duties performed in mutual cooperation as directed in the authoritative scriptures for spiritual advancement, it is then that we can really enter into a community of devotees, whether as householders or as brahmacharis. And then it is then also that we can really obtain the benefit of that community, the benefit of that support. And to understand that it is always going to, life in the material world means struggling. And to be prepared for that. And to understand that one has to work and one has to sacrifice for either one of these identities. To make an identity meaningful, there has to be some sacrifice, some struggle. That is really the purpose. If one always remembers that, then one will really get the benefit. And the benefit of Vedic identities, whether it's brahmachari or householder, the benefit of these positions, because one would say, this sounds so intense, so all these high ideals, so much sacrifice is required. But the benefit you get from that is depth, an immense depth in your relationships. Because it is when personal desire, when personal selfishness is pushed to the side, it is then that there can be real relationships in either one of the ashrams. Then there can be real, genuine affection and care and concern. And that is really what we are looking for. So even though there's some austerity, some discipline required, but the payoff is immense. The payoff is that one can really come together. And you will see that people that are, it's selfishness that keeps us, it's almost like when you have two magnets that are the same pole and they come together, they're always pushing away. So there is that sense of selfishness that makes it impossible for us to really connect. But as we overcome this, we will see, and we see it in the lives of, sometimes we have the opportunity to see some very senior devotees who connect with one another. And that's quite amazing. And there's people that have spent 50 years professionally cultivating, professionally moving against selfishness. You see some of these spiritual leaders that have really made it their lifetime mission to overcome personal selfishness. And you see when they come together and they have relationships, it is amazing. Because there's none of this disruption, none of these disruptions that are caused by personal selfishness. So that is important to understand as we try and orientate ourselves in Vedic culture. And as we see here in this pastime, we see something interesting. We see that Diti, even though she made a mistake, her husband tried to remind her, there was a mistake made, overwhelmed by the mode of passion, but the relationship was not disrupted. There was no disruption. It continued, because that is the whole point. It's not the point that one is trying to be perfect. The point is that one is continuing to strive for Krishna's pleasure. And we see here at the end, we see that even though the result of this pregnancy will be the birth of Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, but the result is also there of the fact that Diti was extremely respectful. This is a very respectful and pious lady ultimately. And we see that therefore, who is born? Prahlad Maharaj is also born. So Prahlad is also born as the son of Hiranyakashipu. So this pastime is very deep in explaining to us the realities of conditioned life in this world and how it interacts with these high ideals of Vedic culture. So let's hear if there are any questions or any comments that anyone wants to contribute. Natabar.
I have one question and one comment. The comment is Prabhupada in the purport saying how actually in the material world there's no love, and that marriage should be based on like duty and responsibility. And I always, when I think about relationships based on that duty, like was it Pran Govinda or someone was saying like if you look at a relationship in the modern day, the graph of like happiness goes like, it's like up, 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 and then after a year or two, then it just, lasts maybe up to 7 years, and then it's just like nothing. And then a relationship based on duty, it just keeps going up and up and up, and is much more stable. And even though there's no love in the material world, I would say that culture is something a lot closer to love than just like Prabhupada was saying, and that just to see the other partner as an object for sense gratification. So there's that. And then my question is, could you maybe compare and contrast, like what if a devotee doesn't want to kind of adhere to these norms? Maybe like the wife wants to work and the husband stays home. How is that dynamic work? How would that disturb things? Like the modern culture is more open in doing stuff like this, and they might say. So what would be your response to someone who's saying, "Oh, this is just like antiquated" or something like that, and why can't the women go out?
Yeah, well, there are two things when we deal with culture, is that there is a form and then there is the essence or the function that it takes. The forms that we see prescribed in culture prescribes certain ideals, or there's certain archetypes that are given. The closer we can get to these things, the easier it will be. And it makes it much easier. It facilitates it, that's a fact. Like we see, for example, take being a devotee. In essence, anyone can be a devotee. At any stage of life, Prabhupada said you can become Krishna conscious in a suit and tie. But if you're living in the temple, and you're dressed as a devotee, and you're following the morning program, and you put on tilak, you have neck beads, these things help a lot. They really help. The external forms, they really support and aid the essence, which is trying to serve and please Krishna. So similarly, all the various forms of traditional culture, these things help. Because we can see in the modern world, as we have further moved away from the ideals of tradition, even the externals, the relationship, what is a man, what is a woman, how it's supposed to work, it has become increasingly difficult. It's become increasingly difficult to be married. Because the more you break these traditional principles, the more strain it will push in the relationship. Doesn't mean we see people can make it work. People can definitely make it work in all kinds of ways. But it puts some pressure on the relationship, puts some strain into it. If the man is staying at home, taking care of the children, and the wife is working and making the money, it's strange. Potentially it can work, but that is going to require. It will definitely put some pressure on the relationship because it inverts the whole thing. Then when the husband is then supposed to he is supposed to be that representative of God, and also some of it cuts also against even some material part of it. It's a little difficult. There's some sense of masculine pride that will also be a little bit sort of disrupted by that kind of thing. So the point is that if we start to create, if we live if we break a lot of these traditional molds, then it will put pressure and strain on us, and we have to be careful how far we depart. Now, all of us in the modern world, we have to depart. Who's living an ideal life? I mean, we all live a strange life because the modern world. Why is that? Because the modern world, the priority of the modern world is not actually personal happiness and satisfaction in the relationships. The priority of the modern world is really made to increase economic production. For example, why for a long time women were never expected to work? Why is that? Well, because women can stay at home and raise children. But why are women working? Why was it made? There was an interesting clip on YouTube that I saw with a man who used to work for the Rockefeller Institute. He used to work for the Rockefellers. So the Rockefellers, big powerful family, and they had an immense influence on the shaping of American society, which includes modern society. Then he said, that's what he said. He said the feminist movement in the 60s was funded by the Rockefellers, and also actually by the government to a certain extent. And why was that? The main goal was to also have women enter the workforce. And why is that? Who benefits from that? Yeah. Firstly, well, the government. Because you have 50, it means you have double the amount of people that will now be paying tax. You have double the amount of people that will adding to the economy. That's really what it's about. So when people look at traditional society and they say, oh, this is antiquity, it doesn't work, the modern world works better, then you say, well, do you know where the modern world comes from? Do you know why it is like it is? It is like that. These things were decided to a certain way because to add basically to the economy. It was not designed for your personal happiness and pleasure. So even if you look at something like a career, now in the model it's a big thing, your career. And people sacrifice immense amount of energy and time for their career. But actually most of these jobs, they really suck. You know? Like the other day I was at the hospital when I had like an accident last year, and I went to the hospital and I was sitting there and I looked at the doctor was there, the doctor came and he fixed me up. And I was thinking, well, this guy is actually, I mean, he's paid probably a lot of money. I'm not no offense to doctors. I think it's fine to be a doctor. And there's a lot of prestige in being a doctor. But actually, this guy is a mechanic. You know, it's actually like a blue-collar job in one sense. He's sitting there with his little uniform so he doesn't get all kinds of blood on him. And he has his mask and he's sitting with his thing and he has his tools and he fixes you up. But it's a very prestigious thing to be a doctor. And people sacrifice immense amount of their life to be a doctor, and they work under immense pressure. Why do they do it? Because of money. It's not like particularly fun. It's very austere. So many of these modern careers are actually very painful, but because there's money behind it, people will do it. So so my point is that when we look at traditional society, we have to understand that it's there for a reason. Many of these archetypes or these traditional forms, they help. As much as one can imbibe them in one's life, it will help one. But at the same time, and this is Prabhupada's attitude also, is when trying to adjust ourselves towards the standards of, say, Varnashram or traditional culture, keep one thing in mind. Keep the ultimate goal in mind. Don't think that the ultimate goal of life is Varnashram, because all of us will, at a certain point, not embody it perfectly. But therefore the ultimate goal is to hear and chant about Krishna. That is the main thing that implements in life. And then around it, you try your best to create a life that is supportive of that. And also for those people who do hold traditional values in high esteem, you will also have to understand that perhaps it will take some intelligent planning to work towards it. Like I know of many friends, for example, who decided that they wanted to live a simpler life, live simple somewhere on the land, but then they had to work for it. Then they worked for 10 years, saved up money so that they can buy land and go live simply. So that also sometimes is there, that one has to, if you want to move towards a simple life and move towards living more in harmony with traditional ideals, it might take some planning, and you have to work a little bit for it, because it's not necessarily, because the modern world is pushing against you. Like for now, if you have a goal, you say, okay, I want to be a stay-at-home mom, and the husband works. You have to work for that, and you're going to have to sacrifice for that. Because what's interesting is that 50 years ago, the average salary of a man, because women didn't work, the salary was made in such a way that a man can earn enough to basically pay for a family. But now, the salary has equalized. So the average salary is actually half of what you really need, in one sense, to live a modern human life, as usual people live. It's made for dual income. The modern world, like New York City, is designed for dual income. It's designed for two people earning money together. So if you say, okay, well, I want to live according to these traditional principles, you can do that. And you're going to definitely get benefit from it. But you're going to have to sacrifice for it also. You're going to have to really simplify your lifestyle. So in this way, we all have to decide for ourselves how much we want to do it. But definitely there is benefit. There is definitive benefit in getting support from traditional society. And we saw that was Prabhupada's plan also. Prabhupada came, he looked at these cities, and he said, this is very difficult. Living here is going to be very difficult to be happy in the modern world. And therefore he had a desire also to start traditional communities that will be much easier to be happy there. But these communities, you see, they take some time and energy to develop. So maybe one more question. Yes, Aiden. Hadai gets it. So it's 9 o'clock. If anyone wants to go, you're welcome to go. But we can take a few more questions. But you don't have to feel compelled to stay. Yes, Hadai.
Yeah, I just really like this point that you're mentioning about struggling together, whether in the ashram or in married life, like everybody's struggling with somebody. And I was you brought up this point is that sometimes we can get very hard-hearted, living either as in an ashram when somebody's struggling, we have to be a friend to them, and when either in an ashram or in married life. So I was just wondering how sometimes we get a little ego trip if, like, say someone's not attending the program or something like that. We want to make ourselves feel better that we're attending the program, but it's not really for their benefit. It's for just to make us feel better, and that makes us hard-hearted. So I was just wondering, how do we get this stigma out and kind of work for this, in the sense that to make us all better, not make ourselves hard-hearted in that sense.
Yeah, well, we have to understand, like, you need two ingredients. So the one is, like, if you look at Prabhupada applied pressure to people. It's no joke. But it came from a place of wanting to help. Like if someone was not performing his duty, the idea was, well, something is wrong. Like if someone is not doing what he's supposed to be doing, isn't it, oh, this person is a nonsense because he's not doing it. The question is, what's happening? And usually time, especially like if you have a position of temple management and people come and complain. They say, oh, well, this guy is like completely spacing out. He's not doing this, he's not doing this, he's not doing this, and then people complain. But then when you sit with someone and you call them into the office and you sit with them and you say, what's up? Then you will see usually something is up. Something's wrong. They have some stress or something is happening, their mind is disturbed. So if we see something is wrong, it's not that, oh, because you see now the other people think that, oh, there's the stigma, people feel guilty if they can't perform their duties, so we should just accept everyone as they are, and everybody should just be sort of allowed to do whatever they want to do, and then everybody will feel happy. That's also nonsense, because the reality is we have to struggle. So it has to be combined to understand that, hey, listen, the lower modes of nature are dangerous. These lower modes of nature, they are dangerous. If you get caught up in the lower modes of nature, your life is going to become inauspicious. So if we see someone falling down from a platform of their duty, it should be like, oh, something is wrong. Let me see if I can help. Let me go and reach out to them, see if I can help them, see if I can find out. Because oftentimes, you'll see the power of asking someone what is wrong. The thing with the mode of ignorance is that the mode of ignorance makes us feel helpless and it makes us feel isolated. That's what mode of ignorance does. So if we get in that state, if someone comes and if you reach out to someone and you say, hey, what's happening? I see you're not doing so well. It's something we can do. That dissipates that tamagun to a certain extent. And then people will respond positively. So, but at the same time, to understand, performing the duties, Prabhupada said, any sane man is afraid of falling from his position in life. So all these duties that we perform, these things keep us, they protect us from the mode of ignorance. So this dual understanding of helping someone and taking care of them, but understanding that the duties and responsibilities that we have are not just unnecessary pressure that we put on people. No, it's these two things, they come together. And in this way, we have a supportive environment. And that we understand that if someone is not doing, the big thing is, when someone is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, our natural assumption is this person doesn't want to do it. Or they're just being difficult, or they're just being selfish. But 95% of the time, it is actually just because there's something wrong. That something is wrong, something is happening. And if we find out what it is and we help someone solve that, then immediately it becomes possible for them to also perform their duties. In this way it goes together. Aiden. Same question, okay.
I guess maybe you could elaborate. Maybe if you could elaborate more on. Sometimes there's different levels of maturity, and creating relationships with devotees is really important. But we also, as there's a saying, with familiarity breeds contempt. So how can we, or what does it look like to really build relationships with devotees when we're all operating on different maturity levels?
Yeah, well, Rupa Goswami says one has to associate with like-minded devotees. So firstly, I also do think that there will be differing levels of closeness that we also have with devotees. To artificially think that you will have, that all devotees will all be your best friends, that's not really true. So even within the society, there will be differing levels of closeness in our relationship, and that's fine. But the idea is that there's a baseline. The lowest level, the lowest relationship that you should have with a devotee is one of respect. That should be like the lowest possible thing. You should be someone, you should be respectful to them. Even sometimes if a person's behavior is not proper, like say if there's a devotee who's like, he maybe gossips or whatever, bad behavior, so you want to stay, then you respect them from a distance. But respect is the baseline. So if you bring in that baseline of respect, and you don't go lower than that, and then the other relationships happen naturally, according to like-minded association, similar interest, similar mood, similar mentality. These things also help, but also to understand. So, at the same time, we will have relationships. If we want to associate with people that are senior to us, so people that are more advanced with us, there's some austerity involved there, because then we have to. If you ever travel with a spiritual master, it's great to travel with a spiritual master, but it's also intense, because like you have to actually restrict quite a lot of your personality, your desire to be able to be close to the spiritual master like that. And therefore, if we want to enter into higher levels of association, we will be required to sacrifice some of to keep our own lower modes at bay to do that. So it depends on us. If we want to have that higher sangha, we have to work for it. We have to serve, and we have to be respectful, and have that service attitude is what will make us eligible to associate with devotees who are more advanced than us. And in terms of in the ashram in general, yeah, we can have respectful relationship with people, and we don't have to artificially, I would say, think that everybody is going to be best friends. But we can all be one another's well-wishers, and we can all be respectful towards one another. That is like the baseline that keeps everything above, where it becomes, where the modes of passion and ignorance will cause disruption. Okay, I think we will end here so we can take some breakfast. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Go Premanande.